Mindset Game podcast, and I'm your host, James Roberts. Before we get started with this week's show, first off, let me take this opportunity to welcome back the regular listeners. And if this is your first time listening to the show, I hope you enjoy this episode and decide to subscribe to the show. And today's guest, I've got Dr. Bhrett McCabe. He's the founder of the MindSide and has been a practicing sport and performance psychologist and a licensed clinical psychologist since 2007. He presently works with numerous players from the PGA and LPGA Tours, development tours, and serves as the sport and performance psychologist for the University of Alabama's athletic department, as well as an NBA team. Thanks, Bhrett, for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
We talked briefly off air about a few topics. Can you tell the guys listening and obviously watching on YouTube how you came about becoming a sports psychologist in the first place?
Yeah, I was an athlete in college. I played baseball at Louisiana State University, and our program was the team of the decade of the 90s. We won 5 national titles in 10 years, and it was through my own challenges. I struggled with an injury, and I struggled being completely aggressive to what I wanted to accomplish. And what happened was I struggled with success. I was good at failing, but I wasn't good at success. And I really needed to learn how to overcome it. So I went and saw a guy who taught me how to work through it. And I had a lot of success. And so I decided after that season that I was going to go into psychology. So I'm a clinical psychologist. I'm a specialist in the interplay between medical and psychological symptomatology. But all I do is work with athletes now. So one of the things that I'm a specialist in is injury rehabilitation, and getting athletes back to the field a little quicker.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And obviously, working with different sports, obviously, you say with injuries, obviously, there's different ones that can come about, obviously, between, say, for example, football injuries are going to differentiate between that of golf injuries. And how does kind of the psychological mindset of the players differentiate between the sports?
Well, some sports like football, we tend to romanticize the warrior-esque mentality. Take me up, run me back out there. Other sports tend to be more needing to feel just about right in order to compete at the highest level, like sprinters, and rightfully so. I mean, if there's a twinge in the hamstring, it tends to be a little bit of a concern. The psychological aspect of injury, though, is understanding that there's a process to recovery as much there is in the physical process. One of the things that we do as athletes is we anchor, meaning we identify a time in our life when we can't do something as the time that we were the best at doing it. So we look back to 3 or 4 years ago and say, but I used to have no pain, I had no limitations. As you and I were saying before we came and started recording, is that many times our limitations become our blessings, but we identify them as a rate limiting factor or as a problem versus looking at them and saying, okay, what can I learn during this time? What can I learn about me? And so for all athletes that are going through injury, one of the biggest challenges is understanding their role and their value. Because as an athlete, we identify as the positive aspects of an athlete. People know you, they watch you, you're physically fit, you feel good about yourself, but now we have this injury, and those factors are now rattled. And so how do we put that back together? And that's the challenge. I mean, look, it's not much different than, if we take a short-term disability or a long-term disability, it still becomes, for most folks, it still becomes in their forefront of their ideals and their presentations. It's always on us. It's always around us. We're always aware of it. So, you take an athlete who's never had a knee injury and can run and walk without thinking, now all of a sudden has a torn ACL and is fully limited for the next X amount of weeks. Now, to go to the bathroom is a chore. Well, if you take individuals as like my dad, who had physical limitations the last 10 years of his life, to go upstairs at our house, we had 6 stairs to go into our house. I felt so guilty for so long because it was hard for him. If we needed to go run an errand, we had to really think about how we were going to do it because getting up and down those steps every single day was a challenge. And it would wear him out to get in the house. And so for athletes, it's a short-term disability, but it has long-term fear associated with it. Is this the new normal? Versus, all right, this is another challenge, I'm going to overcome it.
Okay. And I've got one question from one of my followers, Chris Lynette. He's asking, what's your opinion on the 10,000 rule, and do you agree with the same?
So the 10,000 hour rule was started, and it was based on some research by Anders Ericsson, who just recently wrote a book called Peak. And if you haven't read Peak, I've got it on my bookshelf, Secrets from the New Science of Expertise. He'll even tell you that this 10,000 hour rule has been a little bit bastardized, oversimplified. Look, we can't argue with the fact that certain people are just more talented than others. Their ability to take whatever skill they do, whether it's throwing a baseball or catching a football or jumping, but those skills have to also be refined. So it's the ultimate nature and nurture approach. I think what we need to learn from the 10,000 hour rule is that there's a deliberate way to train. And if we follow the deliberate way to train, we increase the probability of our success. We don't increase success. We increase the probability of success, because there ultimately still comes an it factor, which might be our own talent, our belief systems, something to get better. Simply doing something over and over again. Most of the studies in the 10,000 hour rules that supported it were retrospective studies. They identified a group of prodigies or people who have already achieved success and then studied them to try to find answers. So it's a little bit of a selection bias. Every other study where we've tried to look at it, where we hyper train people, it hasn't produced anybody. If you look at the Chinese Olympians, they have long-standing Olympic development programs that would probably adhere to the 10,000 hour rule. But what they have is a lot of attrition. They go through and cull the herd constantly to try to find the diamond. So what are they looking for? Somebody who has this innate ability, this underlying ability to be successful. So I think the 10,000 hour rule, we have to look back at it, and Anders Ericsson would tell you, we have to accept the fact that there has to be purposeful practice in that moment.
Okay, and then one comment he goes on to ask, in the past there's been experiments which have produced sportsmen like, for example, the Polgart sisters, chess champions. Do you think the same should be done with tomorrow's sportsmen and women?
No, because it's a win-at-all-cost mentality, right? So if we look at the sisters that you're referring to in chess, it became all-consuming. It was a lot of other stuff came at that risk for them to be successful as chess champions. If you look at, let's look at Venus and Serena Williams. Okay, Serena is probably the greatest female tennis player, maybe one of the greatest tennis players of all time. I think she's up for debate for that as maybe the most dominant tennis player of all time. But she was raised with an idea from her family that they were going to be professional tennis players. How many people have come up in that same boat and have not been successful and have nothing to show for it? There's a lot of those. We just don't hear about them. So I think we have to be careful. We have to train our kids to be well-rounded, because at the same time, early specialization is effective. Okay, it works. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't produce well-rounded individuals that are always successful down the road. So I think cross-specialization or cross-exposure to other sports is very important. So what happens to me is if we take that and we put them in a singular approach, what happens is we tend to ignore the other benefits that we really need to have for development.
It's definitely something I agree with. Obviously, the cross sports one, obviously, it's probably something you'd attest to as well as myself. When you were younger, I'm trying to think how many sports. Over my lifetime, I've ended up doing 3 sports at national level, and say about 6 sports throughout my lifetime. So obviously, as a youngster, when they overlapped, I think I did 10-pin bowling and karate and swimming, and they kind of overlap. So I've not dove solely into one sport until I probably got to about 16, and obviously by that time I'd kind of progressed up the ranks, and then that's when you have to specialize.
You have to specialize at that point. It's interesting here in high schools in the United States, particularly because of the draw of football. a lot of high schools will silo and select kids to play only football. Well, what happens is the other sports, the really, really good athletes that could maybe play college in other sports like baseball or track or soccer, lacrosse, are playing football. And they kind of get shamed into playing football. The problem is they're not good enough to play college football. So by making them specialize too early, we're losing the development in other sports. Back, when our dads were of age, it wasn't uncommon in high school to have a 3 and 4 sport letterman. Now it's very rare to see a kid play multiple sports in high school. Also in college, you never see a multiple sport athlete in college. But I think we might be missing that because there's no reason why a kid can't play football and baseball. Maybe football and basketball. Because they may not be able to keep the weight on because they're running up and down the court, but there's a lot of skills that they learn in that setting to help them be successful. I think as parents and as coaches, we have to encourage folks. I would even do things at practice where you bring in another sport. So if you're playing soccer or football, in the UK, bring in volleyball one day and train. Take a practice at the end of practice and play volleyball. And just call it a fun day, but watch the development and the ability to work as teammates. And is the superstar on the pitch going to be the same superstar on the court? And how are they going to deal with that? And there's a good aspect to that. And I think we have to learn. Some of it's requiring humility, but it's also learning self-mastery. Because, the way that we used to learn how to learn a sport, the way we used to grow to learn a sport was through self-mastery and self-identification, through trial and error of ourself. Working on it. Now we have coaches that say, oh, no, you're in the wrong position. You need to do it exactly like this. So the athlete loses that self-development and trial and error that comes with just trying things out. I learned to pitch throwing into a packing crate on the side of my house. And my dad was a college baseball catcher. He knew what he was doing, but his thing was go out there and figure it out.
Well, it comes down to, obviously, like you say with baseball pitching, it comes down to what's the word I'm looking for? Obviously, each pitcher has their own way of pitching to suit their. There we go. The biomechanics of the movement is everybody. Obviously, if you look at pitchers side by side, say at the Major League Baseball level, they're not all gonna have the same technique. So it's finding a technique that works for you to get the best out of yourself.
Mm-hmm. But look, if we look at the most valuable resources in the world, like a diamond, it takes pressure, intensity, and heat to create that diamond. We cannot keep continuing to create athletes, whereas we were saying before we went on the air, that they're not vulnerable to the outcomes. They've got to be vulnerable. They've got to, they've got to learn that failure's an option. Okay, failure always must be an option, because if it's not, what are we going to really fight for? But what happens is we got to learn how to look at failure and realize that success is more important to us. Well, the only way we can learn that is to face failure.
Well, it's probably what we've gone away from now in this day and age. Is obviously using looking at success and putting it on a pedestal, as opposed to using failure as a tool to, something you use in psychological terminology, as in like reflective practice. It's looking on, okay, I may have done this wrong, and breaking it down and looking, well, where can I improve that to get to success?
Mm-hmm. Well, nobody wants failure, right? Nobody wants to experience disappointment. But the only choice we have afterwards is either we allow it to become our essence, or we allow it to become our motivation. And I don't know about you, but I don't like to walk around thinking that I've failed at things. So if I failed at something, I'm going to learn from it. And I want to figure out the best way to get better, the fastest way that I can. And the only way that I'm going to get better is I'm going to take that challenge again and I'm going to beat it. You can tell me all day long that I did a good job, but if I know I didn't succeed, all I want is another opportunity. Now, sometimes in life, we don't get that other opportunity. and that's disappointing. But the truth is, we have to have that opportunity. If not, we have to find something to challenge ourselves. If not, then we regress. We become comfortable in our environment. Even the most painful environments that we're in sometimes can become predictably comfortable. Doesn't mean we enjoy it. It just means there's predictability in it. Okay? And once we get to predictability, we kind of have stability, which is very important for the human mind. That doesn't mean it's good, but that's why sometimes people get caught up in bad relationships and they stay there.
And it's something we touched upon a little bit briefly off air. Obviously, I brought up the thing with the British government and bringing in making sport more about participation at elementary level. Why? Obviously, you touched upon it off air a little bit. Why is it such a bad thing that the kids are looking at sport from more participation way instead of making sport about which in terms is you could associate to life about competition?
Well, first, every kid I've ever been around in a participation environment knows the score of the game they're competing in, and so do their parents. So we can pretend that nobody cares. Everybody cares. Life is about competition. Life is not about complacency. Those who are complacent get eaten. Okay, I mean it's just survival of the fittest. You're gonna get bypassed. The challenge is for participation. Yes, there's a point where we go too far when it comes to success and failure. We have to look at the human development aspect of things. Participation in its own is not development. Coaching, leadership, growing skill sets, that's development. So we have to sometimes temper our desire to succeed by making sure that other kids on our team who are not the superstars can develop, because they may become superstars. They just have not had the attention. But simply getting a ribbon because you participated isn't coaching either. That's just giving a ribbon because they participated. So the biggest failure of coaches in our society is we don't have individualized developmental plans for every player on our teams. Why wouldn't we? We should have, every player that we coach should have a developmental plan. If Brett is on your team and he's not going to play a lot this year, have you communicated that to me? I hope you would, and I hope you tell me what I need to do and what I need to learn from this year and what my role is. Without that, then you're leaving me to guess, which causes me to quit. So when we become so focused on success, we tend to forget the development. We get so focused on participation, we forget to actually coach people. Rolling a ball out there and helping them find it on themselves is good when it's in the backyard, but not in an organized event.
That's definitely a good point. It's something you kind of brought it out to, obviously, looking at it from a grander scheme, then obviously it's not about participation. There's a deeper root to obviously...
It's development. I mean, look, how do we gain mastery? We gain mastery by going through things that are good and things that are bad and learning how to identify our pathway to achieve success. So if you're not very good on the pitch and you just get a participation trophy for playing, they failed you. They need to spend some time. Now, you might just not be very good. I mean, you might be terrible, okay? But then my job as a coach is to get you into something that you're good at. Okay, and it might be a certain position that you can get away with your deficiencies a little bit, all right? But if I'm not coaching you up, how are you supposed to find it? Just luck? We have to have a developmental plan for everybody. If we just assume that, unfortunately, if we get a team of nothing but great players, what happens there is then, people improve together, but the real issue is that the players that are waiting to be developed, who probably are more physically delayed, particularly happens in men's sports, they get lost.
Which in turn probably they end up leaving the sport altogether.
100%, because it's not fun. I played 1 year varsity baseball in high school because I wasn't good enough to play varsity. In the United States, you usually play varsity your junior, senior year. They held me back athletically, not academically, but athletically, because I wasn't good enough. I wasn't big enough. I grew late. I was the youngest kid in my class, and I didn't grow until I was a senior. Then all of a sudden, I went on to play college baseball, and everyone was like, where'd this kid come from? The fact was, I should have probably been held back a year, but academically, I was fine. I had no problems performing. And how did my parents know when they started me in kindergarten? They were just putting me in kindergarten early because they wanted me out of the house. They had no idea 18 or 15 years later that I needed to be held back. But in today's world, that's not uncommon. Okay, so they'll hold a kid back to try to maximize. But then they get to college. Guess what? Well, when I went to college, I redshirted, so I had to wait another year to play because I was the youngest kid on my team. But I played 5 years instead of 4 because I was held back 1 year. But that's all that happens. I mean, so we have to look at our individual developmental plans for every single athlete we have. If we don't have that, we are failing as coaches in those organizations.
That's definitely a good point you raised, Brett. I think we'll wrap it up there for today. Thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely.
If anybody wanted to get in contact with you to ask any further questions, how would they go about it, and what would the best form of social media to get asked such a question?
The easiest way to get to us on social media is at the MindSide, TheMindside. You hit me up there, I'll get back to you. I'll probably get you from my personal account, but our company account is the MindSide.
Okay. And once again, thanks for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
If you wanted some bonus content, I have now set up a Facebook group where you can interact with both the guests and I. The name of this so-called group is Mindset Game, so why not come over and check it out for yourself? And before I forget, I would really appreciate it if you would be so kind as to leave a short written review in iTunes, as it helps to get the podcast more notoriety and it would be more visible in future to others, and thus helping more people, which my guests and I are all about. Once again, thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time for another episode of the Mindset Game podcast.